Hey guys, today we're going to talk about a new anime of the season that you're sure to enjoy. Imagine living alone in another world. In Loner Life in Another World, Haruka is transported to a new reality full of magic and challenges, where he must survive on his own. Will he become the hero he never wanted to be? Leave your like, subscribe, and come and discover this epic journey. On a typical school day, Haruka is sitting alone at his desk. He's a complete loner and he's well aware of it. In fact, he prefers it that way, since his only other option would be to interact with his classmates, and he despises them deeply. The class is divided into several groups: the delinquents, the popular girls, the gym bros, and, of course, those no one really cares about. Haruka doesn't belong to any of these groups, and he's perfectly fine with that, as it gives him more time to read his books without distractions. However, his quiet reading is interrupted when an intense light begins to shine under his feet. A summoning circle seems to be forming, also involving the other students in the room. For a moment, Haruka is excited, realizing that this means only one thing. He is about to embark on an isekai adventure. But just after that thought, he remembers something important. He spent too long consuming isekai media to know that this probably won't end well for him. Determined that he won't be a victim of another world before the release of GTA 6, Haruka decides to flee while the portal is still charging. He runs to the door in an attempt to escape, but unfortunately, it seems to be magically locked. Despite his best efforts, he is unable to open the door. The summoning circle is almost complete, and his classmates begin to disappear, one by one. Desperate to avoid being taken, Haruka decides to climb into the vents in the ceiling and wait for the circle to pass. He jumps and successfully manages to crawl into the ceiling of the room. But just when he thought he was safe, the summoning circle followed him to the ceiling, and he ended up being summoned anyway. He could no longer remain on Earth. Based on what he already knew about these situations, Haruka hoped that a fat king or perhaps a pretty princess would soon appear asking for his help. But, of course, that's not what happened. Instead, he came across a bald old man who, with his arms waving, panicked completely at the sight of Haruka. It seemed that the old man was God, the one responsible for the summoning. He had already sent all of Haruka's colleagues to the other world, but because Haruka had the brilliant idea of hiding in the ceiling, his summoning had gone wrong. Now, God needed to send him quickly to another world before his confusion caused any more problems. He informed Haruka that he would be given skills to survive, but all the best ones had already been chosen by others. Only useless and despised skills remained, such as Minecraft villager skill, dice contact lenses, and a stick. To make matters worse, Haruka could only choose a limited number of skills. Enraged, he took his anger out on God for being summoned and only having terrible options. God, feeling guilty, admitted his mistake. Although he didn't want to hear any more shouting from an angry student, he decided to give Haruka all the useless skills as an apology. But, lacking the patience to deal with him, he immediately teleported him to the other world. Having more skills than normal seemed like an advantage, but it didn't do much good when Haruka was thrown straight into a forest. He had never lived in the wild before and had no supplies. However, he soon spotted a bag on the ground, part of Minecraft's villager ability. This magical bag allowed him to store an unlimited number of items in his inventory. Along with the bag, there was a basic set of equipment. At least Haruka wouldn't start his journey completely bereft of resources. After putting on his outfit, Haruka decides to check his statistics. However, due to the game dice, he has to roll a die to get his points. He throws the dice down, and the result is a score of M. Not understanding what this means, Haruka decides to apply the points to his luck stats. To his surprise, when he opens the statistics window, he discovers that his luck status is completely maxed out, which makes him regret not having used the points for something more useful. While examining the rest of his abilities, he discovers that in addition to the useless skills, he has also gained 2 unique abilities. Being a loner on Earth, Haruka won't be able to form groups in this new world. However, in return, his second ability allows him to force monsters to serve him, as he would have no way of making friends. He feels a little disappointed at not being able to create a team, but decides it's what he has for the moment. What worries him most is the fact that he doesn't see any of his classmates around. He finds this strange, since this should be the starting point, but on the other hand, he never cared about them, so why should he start worrying now? At this point, he decides to focus on getting supplies to live well in the forest. But that's easier said than done, as he can barely see with so many trees in the way. At this rate, it won't be long before he accidentally runs into a monster, which would surely be the death of him. Just then, Haruka remembers his ability with contact lenses. He puts them on, and suddenly, he can see all the information around him. The lenses come with an appraisal function, allowing him to traverse the forest with ease. He finds some mushrooms that are safe to eat and decides to collect some, taking advantage of the unlimited capacity of his villager's bag. He returns to the forest and finds a small cave that seems too interesting to ignore. Haruka says a little prayer in case there is a monster hiding there, and then decides to explore the cave. Fortunately, there are no monsters in sight, and the place is quite spacious, which makes him consider turning it into his base of operations. Haruka takes a tent and a magic lantern from his inventory and sets up a small camp. He lights a fire with his temperature control magic to keep warm during the night. Interestingly, this magic unlocked a new campfire skill, and by keeping an eye out for monsters, Haruka also acquired several detection skills. However, his only attack skill remains a simple staff, and he knows he'll need to find a better way to defend himself. The next morning, Haruka wakes up startled and quickly leaves the tent. To his relief, there had been no monster attacks during the night. He is safe thanks to the anti-monster properties of his seemingly useless abilities. But even if he is safe from monsters, hunger is another story. He grabs a frying pan and cooks some of the mushrooms he had collected the day before. If you're wondering where the frying pan came from, it was in his trusty villager's bag, along with a full set of kitchen knives and even some dried meat. So far, this bag has been the most useful thing in Haruka's arsenal, which makes him wonder what kind of villager would have stored these items. Anyway, after eating, he knows he needs to start planning what he's going to do next. He takes a short walk to reflect. The cave will work as a good base of operations for now, but he still needs to worry about finding a reliable source of food and creating defenses against the monsters that might attack him in this world. Fortunately, with his contact lenses, finding food shouldn't be too difficult. He soon locates more mushrooms and some herbs, which will keep him supplied for a while. However, he still needs to solve the problem with the monsters. Just then, his detection ability kicks in, indicating that something is going on nearby. Haruka decides to investigate and, to her horror, discovers that the noise was caused by goblins. Facing one would be difficult enough, but there are two, and they both seem stronger than him. Haruka wonders if he will be able to defeat them with his current strength and even considers running away. But living in this forest means that sooner or later he will have to fight to survive, so he decides to end it while he still has the element of surprise. Although he's not sure if his staff will be effective, he tries imbuing it with one of his most useless magical abilities to see if it makes any difference. To his surprise, the result is better than he expected. With renewed confidence, Haruka comes out of the bushes and attacks one of the goblins, hitting it on the head. The goblin is dazed and confused, but Haruka doesn't stop, continuing to strike until the monster finally dies. Now there's only one goblin left. Haruka dodges the creature's attack and realizes that the goblin's movements are predictable and easy to dodge. With agility, he dodges and then hits it with a magical blast, defeating the second goblin. Having won his first fight, Haruka decides that he has done enough for today and returns to the cave to rest. On his way back, he roasts some mushrooms for dinner and examines the club he took from the defeated goblin. Although it does good damage, it is heavy and has a limited range, so Haruka decides to stick with his staff for the time being. He checks his stats and, to his surprise, he has leveled up after the fight. What's more, all his stats have been doubled as a result. The next morning, Haruka wakes up and has breakfast as usual, but he's starting to get tired of eating only mushrooms all the time. He'd really like to eat meat, but to do so, he'll have to learn how to hunt. First of all, Haruka needs to improve his health. The first thing he tries is the Magic Fusion skill, which covers his entire body with magic, increasing his physical and magical defenses, as well as greatly increasing his strength, which should improve his efficiency in combat. What's more, his evaluation skill has risen to level 2, so he decides to use it to see if anything has changed. The only difference he notices is a question mark next to the descriptions. Haruka, who has clearly never played video games, spends a minute trying to figure out what the question mark means, but soon gives up and decides to go out to train his magic. As he leaves, he notices something on the ground and thinks it might be meat, but it turns out to be just another mushroom. Haruka is almost delirious, hoping that meat will grow on the trees of this world, but he quickly realizes that this is not going to happen. So he continues his magic training. By activating his mana infusion and taking a step, he is propelled and flies several meters forward. His body is much lighter, allowing him to cross the forest with ease, almost as if he were teleporting. His dexterity has also increased, making his movements easier and his attacks more precise. The first thing he does with his new strength is challenge 2 goblins, and, unlike yesterday, he manages to defeat them with ease. Feeling confident with his renewed strength, Haruka thinks about taking on more goblins, but at the sight of a group of 3, he begins to hesitate and slowly retreats before being attacked. Deciding that he has worked hard enough for today, he returns to his cave to practice more magic. Haruka continues this routine. He trains in combat during the day, and at night he experiments with his magic, seeing what he can do with it. Interestingly, he discovers that he can even create coffee tables with his magic. After this practice routine, Haruka finally manages to defeat a goblin with a single blow, and even creates a decent table with magic. He uses his ability to create a gate to his cave, allowing him to go out hunting at night. Haruka finally manages to catch a rabbit, something he hasn't eaten in a while. Just as he's about to start cooking his prey, he notices something moving nearby. At first, he thinks it's a goblin, but upon closer inspection, he realizes it's something worse, the delinquents in his class. He doesn't want to deal with them and tries to leave discreetly in the other direction, but soon realizes that the popular girls, the gym bros, and the nerds are also around. Haruka doesn't think the nerds are that bad. They were quiet at school, but he still doesn't feel like talking to them now. Finally, he notices the student council with the class representative. Although he hates socializing with others, he has to admit that the class representative has always been very kind to him. Perhaps the least he could do would be to return the kindness, if only to say hello. Haruka considers revealing himself and talking to her, but hesitates. He doesn't want to ruin the solitary life he's finally managed to have. Now that no one knows he's there, he has the chance to be truly alone, as he's always wanted. No annoying conversations, no responsibilities, and no one to bother him. The last thing he wants is to spoil everything by interacting with his classmates, who have always been rather annoying. So Haruka makes the ultimate decision. He's going to completely ignore his colleagues and live alone, conquering this new world on his own. And that's the end of the first episode. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss the next part of this journey.